So my name's Katrina Gill and I'm an Education Officer for Early Years with Education Scotland. When we talk about early years in Scotland, we're referring to the period of 0 to 8 years old. So today we're going to be talking about our new reading resource, Learning to Read in the Early Years. And this resource is a three-part resource, and the Building a Literacy-Rich Environment through Interactions, Experiences and Spaces is aimed at ELC colleagues and primary colleagues. And then the other two aspects, developing skills for reading and building independent and engaged readers, is more aimed at our primary colleagues. So today we're going to be kind of digging into the top section, building a literacy-rich environment. We're going to focus on taking that into practice, and we're going to be looking at stories and songs, sound, rhythm and rhyme, and the development of phonological awareness. And we're going to explore the key features of high quality literacy learning through interactions, experiences and spaces. And we're going to think about how literacy can be attached to the everyday experiences that children have, and how we can weave it and build it and grow children's vocabulary, their interests and their knowledge through those everyday experiences. So when we look at the resource, we have these four aspects. So there's supporting children to develop a love of reading, which we know, of course, is really, really important. The importance of oral language for reading, the developing phonological awareness, and building concepts of print. And of course, it's quite difficult to separate out writing as well from reading. And so some of what I talk about will be in terms of that print and mark making as well. So we have got some documents here. So let us remind ourselves of those different frameworks and guidance that we have to support us when we're thinking about developing literacy for young children. So we've got the Curriculum for Excellence, Literacy and English Experiences and Outcomes. We've also got the Principles and Practice paper, and if you've not had a look at that Principles and Practice paper for a while, they came out, almost probably 20 years ago. It's a really good document and it's really helpful to go back and have a look at that. And then, of course, we've got the Literacy and English benchmarks. So what are the features of effective learning and teaching in literacy? This is from the Principles and Practice paper. So throughout their education, children and young people should experience an environment which is rich in language and which sets high expectations for literacy and for the use of language. Children and young people need to spend time with stories, with literature and other texts which will enrich their learning, develop their language skills and enable them to find enjoyment. And spoken language has particular importance in the early years, and teachers will balance play-based learning with more systematic development and learning of skills and techniques for reading, including phonics. So this support for this holistic approach to developing young children's reading and language and literacy skills has been there right from the beginning of Curriculum for Excellence. And then, of course, for early years, we have our National Practice Guidance, which is not so new anymore. It was published in 2020, Realising the Ambition, being me, and I hope that everyone here is familiar with this document. And it's practice guidance not just for ELC, but also for the early years of primary and beyond. And it's a really, really useful document when we're thinking about what our youngest learners really, really need. And section 3 of Realising the Ambition explores what children need to grow and develop. And a young child's development really involves a lot of repetition and cycles of actions and interactions. And as a starting point, research with young children supports the view that the following dimensions are among the most important aspects of child development. So when we're thinking about executive function, we're thinking about self-regulation, we're thinking about communication and language, confidence, creativity and curiosity, movement and coordination, and self and social development. And these really underpin learning, and they're also really essential for children in terms of their survival and flourishing. And this sort of layout talks about what children need from the adults that look after me. So these coloured pages that are laid out across, they go from birth through to the early years of childhood, and they look at that developing child, and they illustrate in practical terms what babies, young children need from you in ELC and in early primary settings that will really support their development. And these tables are written intentionally from a child's perspective. So they say that, I need adults that, rather than being a tick list of sort of a normative development, because we don't want it to be used for planning or for tracking children. We want it to be there to support professional knowledge and help you offer the best kinds of experiences for our young children. I think it's important as well just to say that, although we have Curriculum for Excellence and that entitlement is from age 3. So in Scotland, we don't have a prescribed curriculum for our children under 3, but we know from research and from practice that the learning experiences provided in those earliest months and years in a child's life are absolutely critical to their future success and their future literacy success. And the early childhood experiences that we should be providing for our very youngest children should continue to be based on 4 interrelated and interdependent principles, which are the rights of the child, relationships, responsive care, and respect. And of course, literacy learning doesn't just happen when a child comes into ELC or starts in primary 1. They've been learning literacy since pre-birth, where they're hearing the sounds when they're in their mother's womb, and then of course once they're born, they're hearing that language that's surrounding them. So also in realising the ambition, we have these overarching themes for literacy, and they are thinking about literacy can be attached to everyday learning experiences and opportunities. Warm, nurturing relationships help open up communication and connect literacy to a child's life. Literacy experiences should weave, build and grow children's interests, vocabulary and knowledge. And literacy learning should encourage children to see themselves as readers and writers through purposeful experiences which build on the way that children use literacy. So we've got lots and lots of support and guidance there. I think what I would really like to do is... Oh, here we go. I put them in big writing. Forgot about that. I'd like to debunk this notion of pre-literacy. Young children's investigations of print and their first attempts at written symbols are not pre, they are the real thing, and that's from Marion Whitehead. And realising the ambition says that playful literacy starts with the child and positions the child as an expert at using language. And, it's much more helpful, I think, to think of the emergence of literacy as that lifelong process. And I think, when we think about that pre-notion, we're thinking about the idea that we have to teach children sort of basic skills, and they have to practice them before they can start real reading and real writing. But actually, in terms of children's spoken language, we don't say to children, no, sorry, you can't speak until you've grasped the grammar and you've grasped the vocabulary of this language. We allow those sounds and those trying out bits of speech and putting words together that maybe are not in grammatically correct ways. We allow children to experiment with that. And in terms of children's written language, we also need to be thinking about children as experimenting with the language right from a very early age. Because if we think about having to teach them the skills before they can learn to read, that leads to that overemphasis on the parts of the language, such as phonics or correct letter formation. And we really would be neglecting other really, really important aspects of literacy, such as the purpose for it, the motives, the understanding of it. A child is not going to understand why they're reading something if there's no purpose for it, if they can't see how that's applied in their life and in the real world. So we really want to be thinking about that holistic and strengths-based approach to literacy learning for our youngest children. So thinking about that, purposes, motives and understanding, when we think about literacy, we're thinking about interactions, and our interactions with children are at the heart of literacy development. Careful observation helps us to build that picture of where a child is in their learning, and then we can kind of determine what they need from us, and the environment around them can then assist that further learning. So we're really closely linking those interactions, those experiences and the spaces that we create for learning as really, really literacy-rich environments. And we really need to tap into what really interests a child, and we need to tap into their family environment and their family life, and really attach talking, listening, reading, writing to meaningful environments and experiences that we're creating within our settings and within our spaces. So for instance, here we've got children who have created their own snack menu, and there's a real purpose to that, and they've created their own symbolic representation of the snack and helping other children to choose what they're going to do. So these kinds of real experiences are extremely important. When we look at realising the ambition, and I've just kind of honed in on a section of it, but this is part of the child-centred pedagogy and practice cycle that sits, we have actually repeated it twice within realising the ambition, because we feel it's a really important cycle for teaching and learning where the child is at the centre. And to support children's cognitive development, we need to be thinking about that learning environment as really, really rich in opportunities so that children can engage with different concepts, where they can foster skills for learning such as reasoning, creativity, problem solving. And we need to offer a range of experiences so that children can have that open-ended possibility where they can experiment, where they can be creative, and where it's not narrow and fixed. So when we're thinking, in the past we might have presented lots of worksheets, colouring in sheets. Actually, those kinds of things are quite specific and quite limiting. If we think about children's art, and that's a symbolic representation, which is the beginnings of understanding that something stands for something else, which of course is what writing is, and reading is interpreting that. We need children to be able to understand their own symbols before they move into the world of those sort of fixed symbols that we know as the letters of our language. So we need to really kind of build on children's interests and their investigations, and help them to learn from their problem solving and from the mistakes that they make, and build on the things that they already know. So play pedagogy is a really, really important aspect of this. Play pedagogy really supports the development of relationships and conversations. It gives children opportunities for moving their whole bodies and coordinating their thoughts and their ideas, their senses and the physical body. And then these are really essential skills that children need for reading and writing. So for instance, a child who's struggling to sit in a chair and is kind of moving all over the place is a child who's not developed core strength and is struggling to be able to hold themselves in that chair. So actually what they need is more opportunity for gross motor movement rather than having to sit more in a chair. A child who's struggling to hold a pencil or a pen is needing more opportunity to build those muscles in their rotator cuff, in the fine motor, through meaningful experiences rather than sitting doing more and more copying out of letter formation. So really, play pedagogy absolutely supports that approach. And play pedagogy is really important. Part of play pedagogy is that sensitive support from the adults and the facilitation that adults can give, and really helping to develop really important aspects of literacy, and particularly looking at phonological awareness and developing that through the songs and the rhymes and the stories that we're telling with children, that we're giving the opportunities for them to do. And it's really interesting that phonics strategies are much more difficult for children to grasp when they're taught in isolation as kind of separate things, but when they make sense to them. So working perhaps with children who have English as an additional language, actually relating it to stories so that perhaps there's repetition in the story and it starts to make sense, or to routines where, oh, we've done this before, there's a meaning to this. Children start to understand, they start to hear the different sounds, and they start to build that phonological awareness as they are, meaningfully engaging with that environment that's around them. Play pedagogy helps children to develop rich experiences. It gives that context for learning. And I think it's important that, when we think about play pedagogy and play feeds on experience. So children need that rich range of experience in order to play deeply, in order to play really, really well. And when we think about some of our children, for instance, children who have experienced COVID, where there was a real reduction in experience, and also we've got families living in poverty with a poverty crisis, really, that actually a lot of that is about children's lack of opportunity to experience that wider range of things. So for instance, a literacy experience that you might set up might be, say, a cafe, where you're taking the menu and reading the prices and those kinds of things. But has every child in your setting been to a cafe? Is that something parents can afford to do? Writing a letter is something that quite often happens. I know, sometimes that's quite often something done in primary 1, but have children got experience of writing a letter? Do they know what a letter is? Have they been to a post box? Have they seen a post person? Because letters don't come through the door very often these days. So it's really important that we help children understand that experience and give them that context for the learning. And play is what we call a central integrating mechanism. So play brings everything that children know together. It helps them to reflect on their learning, and it helps them to create new ideas as they put different things together and come up with new concepts. So play pedagogy really, really supports early literacy development in a very holistic way. And of course, that's how young children learn. They learn in a holistic way. And we're thinking about play and play pedagogy. Those are two separate things. So play might be defined as something that is freely chosen, that's intrinsically motivated, and that is absolutely led by the child. But when we start talking about play pedagogy, we are introducing learning and teaching into that. And so play becomes the vehicle for our learning and teaching and the context for much of what happens, but not everything that happens. And children don't only learn through play, they also learn through planned experiences, they learn through routines and real life experiences. So having lunch together is a really important learning experience for children. Having a planned story time or singing time, really, really important, as well as lots of opportunities for children to lead their own learning through their play. So play is really important for children, as is a really literacy-rich environment. So really thinking about the quality of the play opportunities that we're offering for children. So for instance, I would ask people to reflect on how rich an experience is putting letters into the sand or water tray. What really is a child learning from that? Are they learning anything from that? If we're thinking, and it's something that we do see in classrooms, we're doing the phonics, we're looking at this sound, and so we've got a cutout letter S, and children are sticking things onto it in quite random order, so they're not really even learning the letter formation. What are they learning from that? For me, that's an experience that the adult has done to keep children busy. It's not really a learning experience for children. It maybe relates kind of very roundabout to the sound that we've been learning, but actually they're not using that in any kind of meaningful way. So it's really important to think about the meaningfulness of our experiences for children. And I think, for instance, using their phonics knowledge within that literacy-rich environment is a much, much more meaningful experience than sticking things onto a already cut out or already drawn letter. So really encouraging children to use what they already know and build on that. And play is a form of metacognition. So something we know that's really important is for children to be able to reflect on their learning. And they need skilled educators alongside them to support that reflection. But actually play is a form of metacognition because they're using what they know, and they may not be articulating that verbally, but actually they're doing that reflection. And we can support them with that. And there are some really helpful things like using some of the meta skills, for instance, to give children vocabulary to help them reflect on their learning, to talk about what it is that they've been learning, to link it with other aspects of learning. So we can support that metacognition. But, you know, very young children can talk about and do talk about their learning. So when we think about the development of literacy, I want to kind of go right back to the beginning, because if we don't understand what comes first, then actually we don't know what to build upon. So this list has been adapted from Bruce and Spratt, and it kind of goes right back to the beginning for children. And actually, I think one of the things that we're very aware of is that due to COVID, a lot of children have missed out on really key experiences. And there are gaps in their learning, there's gaps in the bricks, really. And we need to know what's missing. Why is a child not at a particular stage, or why they got so far and then they're not making expected progress? So let's have a look and unpick about how literacy really develops, and that then can help us to figure out maybe where there's some gaps and where we need to support them. So first of all, relating to others is absolutely key. And literacy, all of literacy, reading and writing, develops from communication, which can be spoken or it can be unspoken. You know, when a baby looks into your eyes and gives you that big smile, you know, you can't mistake what that is. It's communication. And from the first moments of their lives, babies are communicating through sight, through sound, through touch. And even, in fact, before a baby's born, a mother's responding to that baby. And actually, in utero, they're hearing all of those different sounds. They recognise their mother's voice. And a baby's eye contact and their gesture and their gurgling sounds speak 1,000 words for that sort of non-verbal or pre-verbal child, but they are communicating. And you can see even very tiny babies, a few weeks old, doing that serve and return, taking the space in the conversation, supported by those adults around them.
Tell me about it. Really? No. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Are you feeling better? Oh. Are you feeling better? You feel pretty good? Huh? You feel pretty good? Yeah. So much. Oh. You were pretty mad before. And now you're like so happy. Huh? Were you hungry? Yeah. Yeah. What else?
I feel like you could watch that all day, couldn't you? It's just so gorgeous. But that concept of serve and return is really, really important because they are building on that developing architecture of the baby's brain. You know, when the baby babbles, when it makes gestures, or you can see the muscles trying to work, and when the adult responds appropriately with that eye contact or the words and the facial expressions, when they're giving that space for the baby to speak, neural connections are being formed in that baby's brain. And it's supporting the development of communication, social skills, and also attachment. And it's really, really key, that back and forth, that serve and return. And when caregivers are sensitive and responsive to a young child's signals and to their needs, then they're providing that environment that's really, really rich. Now, of course, I think we also have to think about the children in our classrooms where that wasn't happening for them. So a little tiny baby whose parent is not engaging in that way, perhaps maybe has postnatal depression and so is unable to do that, or a child for whatever reasons, who may not be staying with their parents and may be with different carers. Some of these experiences may not be in place for our youngest children. So it's really important that we know that, because that means that there are certain neural connections that have not been made at that early stage. So children will need more opportunities for developing those earlier stages of language. You know, and if you think about COVID, for instance, parents who were trying to work at home, trying to manage other children, and perhaps had a baby, were probably not spending lots of time with that baby because they didn't have the time. They were stretched, they were under a lot of stress. And so for some of our children who we know have got speech and language difficulties, you know, this is some of the impact of those experiences. So when we're thinking about the beginning sounds of language, and we're thinking about listening, and we're thinking about looking and moving, children are going to look at the movements of the mouth. For instance, a very small child, there's a reflex where if you stick your tongue out, that baby will stick its tongue out at you. And that's the beginning of phonological awareness. The child is imitating, they're taking that space in the serve in return. And then babies have that natural tendency to look at faces, so they're going to be copying, they're going to be fixing and tracking. And actually fixing and tracking is really important for reading and writing. If you struggle to track a line of text across, then it's going to make it very, very difficult for you to read. And if we think about a lot of experiences some of our young children are having where, for instance, they're looking at an iPad and their eye gaze is at a very fixed distance, and they're not having lots of opportunities to look into the distance, to look close down, and to develop the muscles of the eye, then actually children's fixing and tracking becomes more and more difficult for them. So really, really important that we build on those natural instincts in babies to develop them. And of course, grabbing is another reflex that a baby is born with, but you know, they'll hold on to your little finger really quickly, but actually by 3 months old, they're actually actively reaching out to grasp objects. And actually that helps develop the motor skills, and it helps to develop those eye tracking opportunities as well. And eye contact is really important from caregivers, but also that opportunity to look away as well so that children can regulate. Sometimes it can be too intense to be intensely looked at the whole time, so we need to think about that opportunity. And you know, when we think about some of the things in our society, for instance, pushchairs, most pushchairs are designed not to do this, not to support this. They're designed with the child looking away from the parent. And actually also, how many parents have you seen pushing a pushchair who are on the phone? So not actually looking at and engaging with the child. So again, for many children, society has things that are sort of built in to work against these natural tendencies. Movement is really, really important, and it's something I think we forget about in literacy often. But actually, being actively involved in and exploring the language, the environment through movement really helps children to become more integrated. They're organising that sensory information, and that's providing the foundations that they really, really need. Movement and coordination is linked to communication and cognitive development. So it's essential that children have lots of opportunities to move about and be physically active. And not just children in ELC, but actually our older children need those experiences, not just at playtime, but regularly during the day. And we all have this sensory system that we call the vestibular system, and that gives us our sense of balance and our sense of spatial awareness, where we are in space. And it also helps to coordinate our large motor movements and our fine motor movements and maintain our posture. So that vestibular system, it's really important that it is stimulated and developed in order to develop the things that we're going to need as future skills later on. So, you know, a child who doesn't have that vestibular system developed will find it hard to sit for any period of time. We all know the child that sits cross-legged on the carpet and falls over and can't sit still. That's a child that needs to develop their vestibular system as well as their core strength. And, you know, when we think about that sedentary lifestyle of many of our children who may just be sitting on a sofa watching the television, then actually we need to be creating those opportunities for that physical movement. And understanding that link between the gross motor movement and the fine motor movement is really, really important. Children are better equipped to make those fine motor movements if they have got the gross motor skills in place. So both are really innately linked. And when we're thinking about developing writing, children don't just need opportunities to have mark-making opportunities, but they also need to be able to explore lots and lots of other experiences, such as manipulating clay. Clay's a wonderful one because it's really hard to manipulate, so it's really going to build those small muscles of the fingers. I think it's important that we give children meaningful experiences. So sometimes I've seen people thinking, well, we need to develop fine motor skills, so let's put tweezers and pom-poms and let's move the pom-poms from one dish to another dish. I'm thinking, that's really not a meaningful experience for children. However, how about let's wash the baby's clothes and let's peg them up on the washing line. It's the same movement that's being developed, but a much, much more meaningful experience. Or let's take spray bottles and spray the plants and mist them because they need the water to live. And so it's a meaningful experience rather than one we've just kind of put in place because we've noticed that there's a gap. You know, if a child is struggling to hold a pencil, and palmar grip or digital grip, we need to get them climbing trees, we need to get them lifting heavy things, developing all of these muscles. So literacy is not separate from all of that movement. And then we start to move on to the importance of the sounds of the language. So that's really that phonological awareness. And through reading stories, singing songs and reciting rhymes, children are gaining awareness of rhymes, words and syllables. And I think there's a bit of a myth out there that, particularly in ELC, because we have a play pedagogy approach, that means that we can't have any adult-directed experiences, and that's absolutely not true. So it's really important that we plan in group times into our days, that we think about them in a really sensitive and appropriate way. They need to meet the needs of the children, so it may be that you don't have all the children together if you've got a big group of children. It may be that you have smaller group times, but children need that opportunity to come together as a community, to listen together, and to have those chosen and planned experiences. So it's really important that we think about what books are we choosing to read with our children, what skills are being developed by those books, what songs are we singing, what nursery rhymes are we reciting? Is it just the ones that are our favourites, or actually are we extending that range? Am I picking this one because actually it's going to build rhythm? Am I picking this one because it's got really good rhyming? So we need to actually purposely choose and plan those experiences for children to build those phonological skills. Rhythm and music and dance and song helps to develop syllabification, blending and segmentation. And actually there's some recent research from Usha Goswami, which has been looking at rhythm for young children. And one of the things that for very young children they have discovered is that rhythm seems to be a really, really important precursor to literacy for very young children. So children need lots and lots of opportunities to move to music, to dance, to sing together, to have those music experiences where they might be clapping a rhythm, beating a rhythm, and being part of that really helps to develop those phonological skills of syllabification, blending, segmentation, thinking about beginnings of words. If we jump on each word, we're starting to understand word boundaries, so that feeling it in our body is really important. When we use intonation and tone and pauses in language, we can help develop that understanding of punctuation and of the word boundaries. You know, for many children, they don't know when a word begins and when a word ends. And if we compare it to listening to somebody speaking a different language, it's hard sometimes to distinguish what the individual words actually are. So for a very young child, that may be their experience of what they're hearing. So being able to pause and use that intonation can really, really help to develop that understanding of where words begin and where words end. And rhyme, of course, we know that's really, really important. It helps children to hear the patterns of sounds. It helps them distinguish between sounds that are similar and those that are different. And it helps them begin to encode and decode words as they read and write. And of course, children who may be learning a language for the first time or who may have limited language experience, often those repetitive experiences that you get through nursery rhymes is a way of them tuning in because, oh, here comes that phrase again, I can join in on this, I feel safe. It gives that context for children that helps them to feel like they can fit in. So it can really support EAL learners as well as children who may have language or communication difficulties. And alliteration helps children to hear that repetition of the phonemes, those smallest sound units, and also to maybe see the graphemes, so the phonemes in print at the beginning of words. So it can be really useful to have a big book and to be reading the words and to be pointing so that children can see your mouth forming the sound, see it written, and they're making all of those connections. And again, which is why it's important to look at what you're choosing to read, what songs you're choosing to sing, and picking ones that are specifically building those skills. So yeah, that phonological awareness is really, really important, and I think it's something that we are beginning to remember about, but often we think about, oh, learning to read, it's about phonics. You go to primary one and you learn phonics, but actually many children, if they haven't got this phonological awareness in place, are not ready to learn phonics. So it's really important that we understand how we can support children to develop it, but also so we can look and say, actually, you know, this child is not quite there yet. These are the things that we need to put around to support them. So it's really, really helpful if we are creating lots of those experiences for children that will help them to, we're modelling that language for them, will help them to hear the different sounds, and that we also have that ability to know what we're looking for. So there's a whole list, and within the reading resource you'll see there's a whole list of different phonological awareness skills that build upon each other, and that children need to feel really kind of secure with in order to really make progress as readers. So songs and rhymes, really, really important. And there's lots of different kinds of songs and rhymes. So we might be thinking about finger songs and rhymes that will be linking sound and sight and movement together. And they require really significant concentration from children. It's really difficult to coordinate the words and the movements, to kind of be thinking about, oh, which finger am I going to use for this? And actually they're a really essential part of that literacy journey, and they can support the shift for children from the literal into the symbolic. And this is a really important part of what it means to be literate and to be a reader and a writer. So I might, for instance, literally singing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm using my fingers literally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm just counting fingers. But I might sing a song, I'm trying to think, I can't think of the tune, 5 little men in a flying saucer. That's not the tune. But my fingers are now being little men. So they're a symbol now. They're not, they're not individual fingers. So these songs that we can do can bridge that gap from literal into symbolic. Really, really important. If a child doesn't understand that something can stand for something else, then actually, what sense do they make of written words on a page? Because that's what those words are. They are symbols representing our thoughts and ideas. So finger songs are fabulous. Action songs help those whole body movements and that sound and vision. And if we think about that rhythm, those action songs can be really, really helpful for that. And then, of course, nursery rhymes and stories will help develop that sense of narrative and that storyline and characters. And they really help develop wider vocabulary for children as well. They help make it easier to remember new words. And particularly some of the traditional stories that we tell also can be really, really useful so that children are developing that narrative structure. And then Children can develop from nursery rhymes. They can be developing all of those different aspects of phonological awareness, rhyming chunks, alliteration, syllabification, all of those different things if we're choosing specifically the songs that we're singing. And I know that sometimes in primary one, we have forgotten about things that we do every day in nursery, like singing and nursery rhymes, but actually those should be part of every P1, probably every P2's day in terms of building those skills. And I think we've probably said this before, but if we're teaching phonics strategies in isolation, then it's much, much more difficult for children to grasp the concepts. If they're part of what we're doing and they're meaningful, then it's much easier to learn. So stories, again, are really, really important, and realising the ambition talks about that sense of purpose for their child by using the language that they're using, but also then engaging them with that wide variety of stories, songs, symbols, different types of texts, different kinds of media that are all around them. And building that purpose helps to nurture engagement and encourages children to see themselves as readers and writers, and it just doesn't happen by chance. And some of your children will not be coming from families where they see people reading. It's not something necessarily people do so much anymore. So they won't be coming with that cultural capital. So we have to then help them to become readers and to love reading and develop that love of reading. So we can really help children, and we can help support parents as well, and I think this is really important in terms of those bedtime stories. If we're thinking about children coming in to, say, ELC, and if a child has had a bedtime story read to them every night, that child's probably heard over 1,000 stories. Some of them may be the same story over and over again, but they will have heard 1,000 stories. But what about the child who's never had a story told to them? Not because their parents are not wanting, them to read stories, but maybe they don't know that it's important. Maybe they're not confident with literacy themselves. So a really, really important job we can do to help parents understand the importance of reading together with their child. And reading doesn't just mean the words, it can also be looking at pictures and talking about the pictures, making up a story together, also really, really important. I think it's also important to think about when we're choosing stories for children, it's important that we think about stories that are representative of the society that we live in, that have diverse characters and show children from diverse backgrounds. There's a really useful phrase developed by Rudine Sims Bishop called windows, mirrors and sliding doors. And our windows are where we show children themselves, they see themselves, they belong, and they can identify themselves within the resources we provide. The windows are where children can look through and see something different, and they can see lives that are different than theirs. And then the sliding doors are where children can move between the two, and they can move from their own place maybe into another experience, culture, opportunities. So really, really important to think that we don't just provide materials that represent the children in front of us, but that wider society that is around us as well. Again, thinking about the language that's in the books that we choose. Are there repetitive phrases so that children can learn those phrases more easily and join in? Is there a range of interesting vocabulary that's in the books that can extend children's word knowledge? Is there a rhythm or a rhyming pattern? And knowing this in advance can help us to prepare for telling the story. We'll know whether there's vocabulary that we're going to need to emphasise or going to maybe need to explain to children. We might want to emphasise particular rhyming patterns or particular rhythms. We might want to act out some of the words because children may not know what they mean. And all of this supports the development of children's phonological awareness. But it's really important, I think, that we don't just pick the book off the shelf because we haven't thought about it and that's the first one that comes to hand, or just, that's my favourite story and we always read that. Nothing wrong with repeating stories, and of course it's important for children to hear the same stories many times, but it's also important for us to plan those ones in that will develop those skills. This is a link to a series of pamphlets that were developed by the South East Improvement Collaborative, and 3 of those pamphlets are particularly relevant to literacy. One of them is mark making, one of them is developing communication and language around stories, and the other one is developing communication and language around sound, rhythm and rhyme. And that QR code will take you to a Padlet where you can download those, but we're actually in the process of moving those to the Education Scotland website as well, because the South East Improvement Collaborative website has now been archived. So I've talked a bit about that idea of symbolic representation, and literacy is really important. It's really important that we become symbol users and symbol makers. That's what literacy really is. And as soon as children are using symbols, they're moving from that present, from the literal and the concrete and what's real, into something that is not necessarily present or not necessarily real, and they're starting to think in more abstract ways. And we can use symbols, all sorts of different symbols. So children will dance, and they may paint, they may make things, they may use gesture, all sorts of different types of symbols that we produce. And some of those are individual types of symbols that a child will make for themselves, and others are that universal symbol use that we have, of course, which is our alphabet and our words and our grammar. So when children are making something that represents something else, they're also showing us that knowledge that they have and bringing experiences into those representations. They may not be writing a story in words, but they can tell that story orally, and having opportunities to tell stories orally is really, really important. Children will also investigate print, and they need lots and lots of opportunities to do that. And again, they're more likely to do that if the print is genuine, if it is meaningful to them, if it supports their play, and if the method is scientific. And that's an interesting one. But young children are little scientists. They take what they already know and they test out hypotheses, and it may or may not work, and if it doesn't work, they adjust what they know and they take on new knowledge. So actually they're experiencing that world in that sort of scientific way, and they'll ask loads and loads of questions about things and kind of come up with that new knowledge. So children need all sorts of experiences to be able to do that. Children have fantastic strategies when it comes to literacy. They're really good at asking questions. They will watch other people. They will copy what other people are doing. A key aspect for children is using their name. Then your name is one of the very first things that you may actually read or you may write for yourself. So building on the name, building on the letters within a child's name and the sounds within a child's name is really, really important. However, there's a shift for a child when they start to understand that those letters are universal letters and not specific. So a colleague shared with me an experience with a child where the child's name began with A, and they had drawn the A, and then one day the child drew the A on the side, and the parent had said, you know, that's not how you write an A. And she said, no, I've fallen over. And so for her, that A represented her. It was her, and so she hadn't yet kind of come to understand that the A was a universal letter that was used by many people. So again, that's that move from that sort of literal to that more abstract and those universal symbols. Children will exploit what they know. I mean, I love that picture there of the child pretending to be the nursery teacher or nursery practitioner reading the story, copying what they have experienced. And they use those alphabets and use those sounds, and they're making sense of the world. So just really thinking about some questions to think about finally. You know, how confident are you that your spaces and resources in your environment support literacy? Are you confident in supporting the development of literacy through children's play and those interactions, experiences and spaces? And if not, then what maybe needs to change? Do you have a deep pedagogical understanding of development and progression within literacy, or is that something that you're thinking maybe I need to go and revisit that and have another look at it? And can you identify any areas that you might want to develop and that you can think about? So those are questions I'm leaving you to think about. At the end of this, there are some references, and we will send this PowerPoint around to you. I am going to stop there, and we can